Jenna Sally is 17 years old and in the Musical Theater Conservatory. Some of the hobbies she enjoys most are reading, spending time with her cat and dog, and going on walks. She considers herself a television and blanket connoisseur.
Individuality is one of the utmost essential parts of American culture. The idea that here you are free to do as you please without your neighbor or the government telling you what you can and can't do. However, this seems to have translated into a general lack of empathy for one's neighbor. You may see people on your local street corners maskless and claiming that being forced to wear a mask is a violation of their personal freedoms. So how did we get the idea that our personal freedom gives us the right to put others in harm's way? Somewhere on the quest to protect our individual liberties, we have gripped so tightly onto individualism that we seem to have lost our ability to be collectivists. And this isn't just something that's come about in the past year. Our founding fathers brought us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. President Hoover of the 1920s brought us rugged individualism, the idea that a true American succeeds without help from the government. And this past year has brought us Southern California residents maskless and holding signs that say, "We will not comply." And this American individuality complex isn't just an observation. When given tests or surveys, it has been found that Americans are the most likely to try and gravitate towards what will make them seem the most unique. And while this may be harmless in low-stakes studies determining what Americans want to gravitate towards, it can have a high-stakes impact. Assistant professor at the University of British Columbia, Bo Bion, stated that across 83 countries they found the same result, that the most individualistic countries were the least likely to engage in social distancing practices and therefore had the highest infection growths. Even as a young person, I can pinpoint times in my life where I have felt that conformity was the enemy of my individuality. In 8th grade, I ditched Taylor Swift for more underground indie bands. I cast aside my Converse for a pair of more quirky Crocs because society was telling me that in order to have value, I needed to be different from the rest. I watched movies where over and over again I was fed the same lines, that a girl was only desirable because she was not like the other girls. This individuality complex can harm us not only politically and culturally, but socially as well. It can make us abandon our true interests to seem more unique, but we are oftentimes just left less ourselves. I studied Robert Frost in my English classes, and my teacher read me his words. "Two roads diverged in a yellow woods, and I chose the road less traveled by, and it has made all the difference." My teacher used this poem to tell me that I should be a trailblazer, a nonconformist, because it makes all the difference. This poem has become a celebration of individuality and of marching to the beat of your own drum. This has become one of the cornerstones of our nation's principles. But oftentimes, nonconformity is missing the point. Because in this poem, Frost never states what the difference is. This word in no way conveys whether the difference is bad or good. That word rather emphasizes the importance and inevitability of choice. This past year, Americans have been given a choice between temporary masking, a collective sacrifice for the greater good, and rioting on the streets of Huntington Beach, maskless and claiming tyranny. Some Americans have chosen the latter, and it did make all the difference. A difference between empathy, safety, and control, and #1 COVID cases in the world. And while I in no way mean to blame this entirely on our nation's citizens, as I do recognize in many ways we have also been failed by our government and those meant to protect us, I think maybe it's time that we take a step back and evaluate our entitlements and lean further into our compassion. Time and time again, our nation fails to adhere to the principles that we hold dearest. We relay the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but these words have no meaning when we use them to justify violence against one another. In order to get through this, we must learn to be collectivists as well as just individualists. We must lead with compassion, empathy, and unity. Collectivism is our way through this. Thank you.
Kai Sparnick is an 8th grader in the acting conservatory. She loves baking banana bread with her sister, watching Gilmore Girls, and playing soccer in the backyard with her trusty 60-pound golden companion, Bailey. Bailey has kept her whole family sane during the pandemic with his patience, affection, and desire to take as many walks a day as he can get. Kaya is an avid dreamer, and she cannot wait to explore every part of the world someday. She's especially fascinated by historical fiction and dreams of being a part of a production like Little Women, Downtown Abbey, or Call the Midwife. Escaping into these worlds is like time traveling to her, and after a year of quarantine, who isn't craving a little more adventure?
For those of you who haven't yet read Where the Red Fern Grows, Old Yeller, or A Dog's Purpose, you'll find them in the damp section of the library because of all of the tears of past readers that are permanently soaked into the pages. Why is it that all of these stories are so lovable and so heart-wrenching? It's because all of these books were written about dogs. You've all heard the saying, a dog is a man's best friend, right? There's a reason it's not a goldfish is a man's best friend or a crocodile is a man's best friend. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. This connection, this unbreakable bond between dog and man exists because dogs teach human beings the purest form of love there is. A love that relies on forgiveness, on really listening to the people who are willing to confide in you, and on seizing every moment you have on this earth with the people you love. Dogs are born knowing how to live like this, but for people, it's something we need to learn. Let's start with forgiveness. It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, I still have a grudge against a girl who flat-tired me and ruined my Target moccasins in 1st grade. But I think dogs realize that life is too short to hold grudges against people. I mean, if you're spending all of your time dwelling on how mad you are at someone for a mistake they made in the past, then you really aren't living in the moment. And you aren't using that time and energy to love and to appreciate what you have in the now. Let me give you an example. My dog, Bailey, hates going to the groomer. He shakes when we're in the car, and he cries like we betrayed him when we take him inside. But when we come in to pick him up, he is the happiest little creature you have ever seen. He gallops toward me with his tail wagging. I mean, you can't even really classify it as a wag anymore. It's more of a flailing motion. And then he jumps up like he wants me to carry him, forgetting that he is a 65-pound golden retriever. Now, if Bailey were a human, he would be very mad at me for taking him to a place he hates so much. But because he's a dog, he forgives me the second he sees me. Which really makes me think, why do we, as human beings, have to think we're going to lose someone before we really appreciate them, before we forgive them for the trivial hardships they may have caused us, and truly realize how much they mean to us? Let me tell you a story. My dog's best friend is a golden doodle named Teddy. His parents are my parents' age, and their son is my age. At Christmas, Teddy's dad was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he was told that he has a 20% chance of living to the end of this year. They say dogs can smell certain types of cancer. I don't know if that's the case with Teddy, but if it is, if Teddy were to figure it out, he wouldn't treat his dad any differently. Because there's no level of love and devotion higher than the love Teddy shows his dad every single day. As humans, we have a tendency to withhold love and affection when we're mad or annoyed, but dogs never do that. Teddy seizes every minute he has with his dad, the same way my dog seizes every minute he has with me, and the same way your dog sees every minute they have with you. Seizing the day. To me, Carpe Diem is about treating each moment as if it were your last by loving those around you and never forgetting to show them. Not necessarily tell them, but show them. I mean, dogs can't speak, but they're better communicators than we are most of the time. I know my dog loves me because of the way he looks at me, the way he puts his arm around my arm, the way he's always there to listen when I need someone to confide in. This seems silly to say out loud, but my dog is living his life the way I want to live mine. He's loving the way I want to love. Now, I know not all of you have dogs. In fact, globally, only 33% of people do. But you don't have to own a dog to learn from them. You can read these beautiful books that people have written about them. You can talk to that one crazy friend who is completely obsessed with their dog, because I know we all have them. So I'm going to leave you with this little statistic. The average lifespan of a dog is 10 to 14 years. I am 14 years old, and I'm just now realizing what dogs are born knowing. You don't need a fancy house or to be the owner of a super successful company to be happy in life. You just need to know how to forgive and to listen and to enjoy every minute you have on this earth with the people you love unconditionally, just like dogs. Thank you.
Lisa Ordonez is a sophomore in the Integrated Arts Conservatory. She enjoys painting, writing, dancing, singing, acting, and playing the piano, and her favorite styles of dance are ballet point and hip hop. As a writer, she loves to write poetry, song lyrics, and short stories, and loves listening to all different genres of old and new music.
Lucy Kim, age 14, is a 9th grader in the pianist program conservatory. Lucy started playing the piano at age 6 and currently studies with Ariel Yang at Opus 119 School of Music. She made her Carnegie Hall debut at age 9 and has won top prizes at numerous competitions.
We all know breathing is very important for singers, wind, and brass instrument players. But breathing is a vital aspect in producing music for all musicians. Did you notice my heavy breathing before I started speaking? I was actually doing a musician's breathing exercise. I'd like you to try it with me. But don't worry, you don't need to be a musician to do this. First, relax the muscles in your neck, chest, and abdomen. I'm going to set this metronome to 50 beats per minute. And we are going to breathe in through the mouth for 2 counts. 1, 2, and breathe out through the mouth for 4 counts and push all the air out on the exhale. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Ready? Let's begin. Inhale 1, 2, exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Great job! Feel free to go and play Flight of the Bumblebee. So, why does breathing like this matter so much? Well, the breathing exercise helps calm my nerves and focus. It also breathes life into the music by establishing the tone, tempo, and emotional characteristic of the piece. I'd like to share an example with you where I demonstrate how I use the breathing exercise to prepare myself for the performance and how I take one long breath just before beginning to play to set the mood for Bach's melancholy piece, Fantasia. Drawing one long breath just before beginning to play can help visually cue the audience to expect a more dramatic, sensual piece. It wouldn't have made sense for me to approach the piece by taking a fast, quick breath. In this next example, however, you'll do notice I take a fast, quick breath before starting Muchinsky's high-energy, fast-paced piece called Desperate Measures. But breathing patterns for the performer and the audience can both change throughout the performance depending on the character of the piece. Researchers actually conducted a study to find out if there was a relationship in the breathing patterns while performing specific pieces, and if there was a difference in the breathing patterns between pianists. The study found that the breathing patterns among pianists were notably different, and that breathing depends not only what's written on the score, but also on pianist-dependent factors. The difference in breathing pattern may stem from the difference in musical expression and interpretation of individual pianists. And that makes sense, right? Each pianist can play the same piece, but that doesn't mean that they will play it exactly the same, and therefore they use their breath to make it their own. Another study found that the audience's breathing pattern when they were listening to music was different compared to simply their normal breathing patterns. What researchers concluded is that breathing is part of the musical experience even when no sound is being made by the musician. My piano teacher always tells me, "Lucy, breathe. I want to hear you breathe." And of course, we are all breathing. It's a key function in order to live. But sometimes I catch myself holding my breath, especially in the more difficult passages in my pieces. And my audience, or in this case my piano teacher, can tell. My lack of breathing shows in my performance and delivery of the piece. The key is to use the inhale to draw the audience into the musical journey and exhale to breathe life into the music. Let me show you another piece that exemplifies how breathing could turn what could be a passive activity, like listening to music, into a shared experience between the performer and the audience. I'll be playing the last few seconds of Tarantella by Franz Liszt, followed by the beginning of the second section. The first section is full of energy and speed, and then transitions to the second section, which is more beautiful and operatic. Pay attention to how my breathing is actually a part of the performance, and how it gives not only myself a chance to take a breath, but also the audience. In this way, both of us can prepare for the new section that is to come, which is different in character, tone, and tempo. As you can see, breathing is inherent in music making, even in those moments when there is no actual sound production. Paying attention to the way I breathe as a musician can help increase my connection to the audience. As a ninth grader who had to start high school online, I am learning to adapt to new academic learning models. Similarly, as a musician, I am learning new ways to express my artistic endeavors. During this pandemic, all musicians are faced with new beginnings. We are all sharing our music in new ways through video conferencing, using Zoom for lessons, recitals, and even concerts. My hope is that despite the digital divide, I will still be able to connect with my audience through my breathing and make the music come to life. In this way, I can engage my audience and, most importantly, allow them to breathe with me. During this pandemic, the whole world needs to infuse a new breath and rethink how music is played and appreciated. Thank you.
Riley Bryant is a senior in the Film and Television Conservatory. She is the 3 times team captain of the mock trial team, a board member on the MUN team, and producer of Art Attack Live, the daily morning announcements show. Riley has over 6 years of training in broadcast journalism and general filmmaking and aspires to one day work for CNN.
How do you get your news? Maybe you're a little more old school and you prefer newspapers, physical or digital. Maybe you have a favorite TV or radio station, like Fox News or CNN, which, by the way, is the most common form of news reception among Americans. But what sets this generation apart is the rise in popularity of social media to get their news. And it makes sense. Social media is readily available, concise, and visually appealing. I'd like to focus on that last part, visually appealing. People like social media sites like Instagram because it summarizes everything you need to know into 1 to 10 images. And it's much faster to look at a photo than it is to read an entire article. Now, photos have been used in journalism since the beginning, but never has it become more prominent than in 2021, which saw images such as this, which highlights the humanitarian crisis currently happening in Yemen. Or this one, which juxtaposes the image of the first female African-American Vice President, Kamala Harris, against that of Ruby Bridges, the first African American child to desegregate American schools in the 60s. Now, social media is a fantastic tool for activists and journalists alike, but as photos become more and more critical to the sharing of news on the internet, it's imperative that we understand the subtle implications that the presentation of a photo can have. Take this, for example. In this photo, framing plays a critical role in the underlying message that the girl is trying to convey. If she had been, for example, centered instead of off-center, you wouldn't have been able to see the White House in the background, and her pressure for federal legislation on the issues she's promoting would have been lost. In the fall of 2019, I set out to find what effects color can have on the interpretation and emotional impact of photojournalism. To do this, I focused on photojournalism regarding the Arab Spring, a series of anti-government and pro-democracy uprisings that spread across North Africa and the Middle East starting in 2010. Now, this conflict is known as being one of the first major world conflicts to be held entirely in the social media age, meaning photojournalism played a larger role in the global understanding of the Arab Spring than most any other conflict to date. Color is surprisingly often overlooked in most analyses of photojournalism, but I think that's a big mistake. Look at these photos. The one on the left was published by the Associated Press, and the one on the right, Reuters. Now, both photos are almost identical. They were taken in the same place at the same time. Both photos were taken by major photojournalism publication companies that have been cited by news outlets across the country. And yet, the photos feel different. The one on the left is vibrant and active. The one on the right is slower, older. Now, this could be because of subtle framing differences, but the fact remains that the color of the photos have a major role in the tone and message that the photos are trying to convey. For my study, I focused on 6 color groups: red, yellow, green, blue, and black and white, in addition to the original color scheme. I then gathered 8 photos of various points during the Arab Spring, all of which were posted to news and social media sites for journalistic purposes. I took the photos and edited them into the 6 color schemes and ended up with something like this. As you can see, we have the original photo surrounded by the red, yellow, green, blue, and black and white photos. By doing this, I eliminate any influence that other photographic elements, such as framing or otherwise, might have on the interpretation of the photos by the participants. I separated the photos into 6 surveys, divided by color, never explicitly mentioning color, and featuring a grayscale design, so as to eliminate any outside influence. I started the survey by asking my audience what they already knew about the Arab Spring, which to my Southern Californian audience was little to nothing. I then proceeded to show each of the participants the photos individually and ask them questions based on their reaction to the photo. What does this make you feel? Would this catch your eye in the news? Those sorts of things. I ended my survey with the same benchmark that I started it with, so as to measure the amount of information collected by the participants as they went through the survey. I was able to take the responses and compile them into a spreadsheet, where I literally counted each individual adjective. And when I tell you it was tedious, I mean tedious. I categorized each answer as either positive, negative, or neutral, depending on the connotation of the word given. I then was able to give each photo a number in each of those categories based on the total number of responses and the number of responses in each category that were given. By doing this, I was able to compare the color surveys with the original survey, the control group of the study, and find my final results as laid out in this table. As you can see, the red and yellow color groups were much more likely to elicit a positive response, whereas the black and white color group was much more likely to elicit a negative response. When compared with the original group, the only statistically significant difference came in the red, yellow, and black and white color groups. So what does this mean? Right off the bat, the cool colors, green and blue, have little to no impact on the overall understanding of the photo. While it could be argued that it made it less boring, as in more positive or negative responses instead of neutral responses, it wasn't enough in either direction to be a statistically significant change. Now, at the same time, the red and yellow groups, the warm colors, elicited a positive response, a passionate response. On the flip side, the black and white color group, a negative response, a more passive response. So, what does this mean for photojournalists? On a broad level, it means that photographers have to pay attention to the colors being showcased in their photos, as they do have an effect on the viewer, and it can create unintentional bias. On a much smaller scale, photojournalists now have another weapon in their arsenal to control the message of their photo. Photographers are always trying to tell a story with their photos, but that can be difficult when you're trying to capture a live moment that's out of your control, like a protest. This information will allow photojournalists to have control over their photos in a way that has never been able to be expressed to such a wide audience in the 21st century. As a viewer, you have the power to identify your own biases in your news consumption and spreading. So the next time you're on Instagram and you see a post that the world has to see right now, maybe before hitting share, you take a second to ask yourself what this photo actually means. Thank you.
Samir Bajaj is a freshman in the acting conservatory. He's a member of the Science Olympiad team, a Boy Scout, and a tutor at the Russian School of Mathematics. He'll be presenting a talk on 3D printing and the complexities about it.
Imagine a machine that can create anything out of a spool of material. A machine that is more accurate and more environmentally friendly than any other industrial method of creation. If you already know about this machine, called 3D printing, you might think that the possibilities are limited to small household appliances. A paper towel roll, some Legos maybe. Certainly not a fully functioning boat, or even a model of a Boeing. Because 3D printing is not confined to that 10 by 10 centimeter space anymore, or even confined to just plastic. I mean, we can print insane houses, hearts, and even human bones. The possibilities are truly endless, and this, coupled with the environmental benefits, really gives some perspective onto the potential and the future of 3D printing. We are living in the future, but the origins of 3D printing are deeply rooted in our history. Because believe it or not, we as humans have been printing and creating for over 32,000 years. We started with simplistic cave paintings. Then we moved on to tablets, and then paper. And next in line is printing solid objects, printing in the third dimension. And this idea seems outlandish, but the first prototype model of a 3D printer was actually developed in 1980 by Chuck Hull. Of course, back then, 3D printers were limited by size and the high level of inaccuracy among most printers. Also, some printers, like early computers, could take up the whole room, and the cost of the printers themselves, plus the plastic needed to run them, were very astronomically high. But here's the thing, 3D printing is always growing, always adapting. And with the increased affordability of printers, the community has grown to be global. For example, the printer I own now would have costed about $2,000 a few years ago, but I got mine last year for just over $200. Nowadays, 3D printers have about the footprint of a modern computer, and the environmental footprint of the printer itself is actually very low. But how is this possible? A 3D printer's main function is to extrude plastic material. So shouldn't it add to the plastic crisis? Well, not exactly. See, the issue isn't really with the plastic itself, it's with the plastic waste from humans. And that's where 3D printing starts to become a viable solution. The way most manufacturing takes place is that plastic is dumped into a mold and the excess is cut off by machinery. That excess is then dumped into oceans and landfills, contributing to the plastic issue and poisoning and trapping poor organisms in the ocean, about 1 million of them each year. The way 3D printing works is that it only uses about as much plastic as necessary. Not only this, but according to ourworldinData.com, 37 million tons of plastic waste in 2015 were produced simply from household dysfunctional items. 3D printing can allow us to replace parts from these items instead of just tossing them out. For example, when I lost the back case to my mouse in 2020, it became virtually unusable. Without a back case, the mouse wouldn't lay steady on a desk, and the company sold no replacement parts. The sites from China which did would take a long time to arrive and cost a lot in shipping, so the better fiscal decision would be to throw the mouse away and buy a new one. However, I used my 3D printer to design and print a back case for my mouse to replace it. The plastic crisis has had a huge effect on the environment, but there's a new issue on the horizon, and it has to do with face masks. Not specifically the usage of the face mask, but more so the waste left behind by them. According to Denver Channel News, roughly 1.5 billion masks were estimated to be left behind in 2020. The reason why this is significant is because masks can actually stay in the ocean for multiple years due to the rubber and metal clippings inside of them. Spain-based company called La Factoria 3D produced a model for a reusable plastic mask and posted it on Thingiverse, a website with over 1.6 million free user-created designs. This mask has many benefits, but the most important two are that you can clean out the inside with soap and water, allowing for multi-personal use, and also you could change the filters, which made it even more secure for multi-personal use. The reason why people did not use these masks is because they felt that it was not as reliable as the fabric masks. They felt that it's not as effective. However, FutureMedicine.com released a research paper that they made, which shows that the plastic masks have a total inward leakage of about 58%, whereas the fabric masks have a total inward leakage of around 45%. For reference, an N95 respirator mask has a total inward leakage of anywhere from 70 to 80%. Total inward leakage measures how much of the contaminant is kept outside of the mask. So the greater total inward leakage, the better the mask is. 3D printing has truly just gotten started, and the benefits are already insane. I mean, think about what we will be able to accomplish given 50, even 100 years. The possibilities are truly endless as long as we continue to look beyond, innovate, and make 3D printing more and more accessible. Thank you.
Sophia Madrigal is an enrolled member of the Cahuilla Band of Indians and is of Turtle Mountain Chippewa descent. She is passionate about cultural revitalization and strengthening gender equality and storytelling. She founded the Luke Madrigal, Luke Madrigal, thank you. She founded the Luke Madrigal Indigenous Storytelling nonprofit to bring Native art forms inspired by social She founded the Luke Madrigal Indigenous Storytelling nonprofit to bring Native art forms inspired by social justice and healing to enlighten oppressed peoples dealing with the universal issues of hardship around the globe. Stories have always been a vital part of her life, in her culture and family and school. She has been taught that stories are medicine, culture is strength, women are leaders, and we have a responsibility to our ancestors. As she develops her own leadership, she aspires to apply these teachings, story, culture, and responsibility, to tackle the unfathomable. As she develops her own leadership, she aspires to apply these teachings, story, culture, and responsibility, to tackle the unfathomable issue of violence against Indigenous women, children, elders, and the earth, and to honor her father.
Healing through the indigenous art of storytelling. There is a traditional story, a generational story, spoken to me by my Chippewa mother that tells of the legend of the Lady Slipper. One winter season, a sickness, A virus comes into a village, and a young girl named Wayane sees everyone falling around her. And so she decides that she will make that journey to the medicine woman's village, a journey never attempted before, in winter. She slipped out of her family's wigwam, dressed in the fur-lined moccasins that her mother and grandmother had sewn for her. And when she reached the neighboring village, she sought the medicine woman's help. And with her medicine gift, she made her way back across the snow. But it was too deep, and she began to sink with each step. When she finally reached the opposite shore, her moccasins were missing, and her feet were bare and cold, and her footprints marked by blood. When her villagers heard her cry, they ran to her, and they carried her home. The medicine she brought saved her people. In the following springs, she went back in search of her moccasins. Instead, she found beautiful pink, white, and yellow flowers shaped just like her moccasins. There was one for every drop of blood that had fallen from her feet on her journey to bring medicine home. The Ojibwe people named the flower after Wayane and her moccasins, the moccasin wabigwan. The moccasin wabigwan is a delicate and mighty wildflower that grows on the mountainsides of the Anishinaabe people, my mother's people. This most rare and precious flower of the north is equal in strength and in frailty. You pick any part of the moccasin wabigwan and the whole plant will die. Yet it will only grow from the harshest and most unsuitable soils imaginable. So how can a flower be both delicate and strong? This question has long rattled inside my mind. Miache, Anin, hello. Naneto Sophia Madrigal, and I am an enrolled member of the Kuya Band of Indians on my father's side and am Anishinaabe, Turtle Mountain Chippewa on my mother's. Growing up, I was taught stories are medicine, culture is strength, women are leaders, and we have a responsibility to our ancestors. Our ancestors survived a great deal for us to be here, and with them, our stories. Yet our stories are being forgotten, and with them, our identity. This matters because if the narrative that is being told is one that begins with Columbus or colonization and ends with the Indian termination policy, you will get a very different perspective than if you begin with our creation stories and you end with our activism. Indigenous stories teach us that women are sacred beings. Aki, the earth is sacred. Nimisin, my older sister, is sacred. Ninga, my mother, is sacred. Ajimo, she who tells a story, is sacred. I am one of 24 Kuya grandchildren, most of whom are girls. As an Indigenous girl, I know all too well that metaphorically and physically we are being taken. I have grown up in communities where women go missing and are murdered at rates 10 times the national average. And of this, 95% of these cases go undocumented by national news media. Indigenous people from across the globe and their wisdom that honors women is being erased. Their voices silenced and their stories untold. It is my responsibility to receive, preserve, and promote these stories, because without them, we are lost. Like Wayane, I started my journey by digging down to the roots of my heritage, seeking the mashkiki, the healing medicine for my people. Ancestral stories are timeless entities which hold powerful archetypes which can help us heal and find our way through unimaginable atrocities. Ancestral stories and storytelling is the core of ancestral wisdom, and it is a traditional form of healing. When I began this journey, I thought I was seeking healing for my people. What I didn't know was that I was bringing healing to myself. At the start of my journey to revitalize artist healing and at the beginning of the global quarantine pandemic, my father died. Suddenly and unexpectedly, and I found myself in an unimaginable need of healing. My father, a cultural carrier, was integral in restoring the Kuya bird songs for his people, and his sudden departure from this earth handed to me the responsibility as the next generation to continue his legacy of cultural revitalization as healing. My father told me that the greatest loss in life is not loss itself, but who you forget when trying to erase who you truly are. I founded the Luke Madrigal Indigenous Storytelling Nonprofit, a tribute to my father. To quote Leslie Mormon Silko, "You don't have anything if you don't have stories." Survival is contingent on its ability to keep telling the story, to keep up the circulation of narration and words that make up the past, the present, and the future of Native American culture. In my life, partaking in storytelling has allowed me to see young Indigenous girls' artistic expression come together in strength against adversity. In this way, I've seen the ill effects of colonization overcome by strengthening cultural identity through story and giving young Indigenous girls a voice in order to heal soul wounds. And I saw myself strengthening through art. Wildflower Indigenous Spirit is a play that I wrote that grew from this traditional story of the Moccasin Wabigwan. It walks the landscape of grief and loss and offers hope to anyone who's ever lost someone. And it is a love letter to my father. The following poem is an excerpt from this play that I wrote. I have a secret that your mind now needs to know. I never left you, and I watch over you as you grow. I am the whispers you hear in the wind, and I am the weathered lines in all the moments you have grinned. When your eyelids flutter and see slumber gone, I am the nudge that sends you galloping towards the dawn. I am the earth that molds your feet in play, and I am a reflection of all the things you say. Do not think I have left you, for it is life's greatest disguise. I smile upon you in each new sunrise. Experiencing my own story's healing power further inspired me and informed my vision as I continue to see more loss and suffering around me due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as natives were being disproportionately affected. But again, storytelling was able to bring community members together to connect by exploring traditional and personal stories for strength against pandemic loss. Sharing the arts as the community, that is the power of story. This is when I finally understood that being an Indigenous girl does not make you weak. It is the very thing that makes you strong. The most authentic thing about us is our capacity to create, to overcome, to endure, to love, to transform, and to be greater than our suffering. Ben Okiri. In many ways, the most important thing that I can bring to my community as an Indigenous girl is my voice, and I can do that through storytelling. This is when I finally understood the Chippewa legend of the Moccasin Wabigwan, of how it could grow from such harsh circumstances but stand with beauty. All of us need to remember who we are and the great capacity we hold and reach the understanding that nothing is ever truly lost. We are the Moccasin Wabigwan. Know your stories. Miigwech, Achema, thank you.
Sydney Montine is a junior in the Creative Writing Conservatory. She enjoys writing poetry, prose, screenplays, and hybrid forms. She is particularly interested in the intersections between varying creative art forms and believes that creativity is the best representation of humanity. Sydney is also passionate about teaching as she holds creative writing workshops for children at her local library, in addition to teaching English as a second language for children in Southeast Asia. When she's not writing or teaching, Sydney can be found curled up with a book, off on a picnic, or dancing in the rain.
About 2 summers ago, I found myself obsessing over the light in my dentist's office. I gripped the edges of the dental seat and squinted up at the tropical-themed shutter. I remember waiting for something to happen, like a giant hand that would reach out from the ceiling and grab me, or a booming voice that would clearly tell me who I am. I thought I could find myself in the silliest things imaginable, like an old friend's smiles, or in the light reflecting in a water glass. I figured if I stared long enough, I'd see the reflection of my true self. 2 years later, and I still haven't caught a glimpse. Merriam-Webster defines self as the union of elements that constitutes the individuality and identity of a person. However, people often limit their idea of self to just one prevailing factor of their lives that they feel overshadows all others. One of the most common identity associations is when one attaches their concept of identity to a singular aspect of life. Examples can include profession, achievements, race, ethnicity, culture, age group, sexual orientation, religion, relationships, family, or even possessions. Have you ever tried to describe a new friend to someone? Chances are the first few things you'll list are related to what they do, their profession, and their achievements. I have also fallen for this identity association. As a teenager, I've been struggling with how I fit into society based on my age group. I used to consider myself a kid, as I felt too inexperienced with life. But now that I'm 17, I can't consider myself a child. I'm not quite an adult yet either. But I'm not just 17. I'm also a writer, a student, a first-generation immigrant, a frequent smiler. I don't have to limit myself to just one component of my life. Another common identity association is something that I like to call adopted identity. Adopted identity is when you associate your identity with someone else's perception of yourself. Having an adopted identity is highly dependent on external impressions of you. People can uplift or put you down on a whim. Everyone has an opinion. This is especially prominent in bullying, as the bully will repeat critical opinions to the individual over and over again. That individual may become conditioned to subconsciously identify with that insult. Other examples include rejections, or even awards, commendations, or any other documentation of another person's opinion of you. I used to solely rely on others' perspectives of myself to define my identity. I couldn't fully tear away from this adopted identity association until I received a rejection I took very personally. A while back, I auditioned for my high school's leadership class. I put my best foot forward, and I got rejected. From a young age, I was involved in student government. I started in early elementary school and continued until high school. I accumulated a variety of fancy titles as proof that external sources vouched for me as well. Student representative, associated student body, spirit director, and even vice president. I went to national student leadership conferences and took leadership classes in school. When people asked me what did I like to do, my first and foremost answer would be related to leadership. So when I got rejected, I couldn't recognize myself. All because of one external opinion. I had to find out who I was going to be without external validation. I had to find the center of my inner self that had been untainted by outside influences. And I found that our identities are not limited to just these associations. While they can make up some of our identity, there is no singular component that makes up our entire selves. In fact, these associations have as much power as we give them. But our identities are beyond what we associate ourselves with. Identity isn't just what we've been through in life. It's what we've learned from our experiences. People can retain different lessons from the same experience. In the end, it's our subjectivity, the individuality of how we comprehend events that makes up our identities. Identity is an imperfect tool to describe the entirety of me or you or anyone else. Like trying to contain the whole ocean in just one drop of water, our human essence vastly outperforms our identities. 2 years ago, I wanted to either return to a version of myself that had been in the past, or fast forward to a version that will be in the future. I felt lost. Today, I don't think I'm lost anymore, or that I ever even was. My identity was just changing, as identities constantly do. We spend our whole lives trying to define who we are, but the answer is elusive. There is just too much in a person to even capture incomprehensible thoughts. Identity has no sense of time, only a sense of being. You just have yourself, and that is enough. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for attending TEDx Orange County School of the Arts.
We really hope you enjoyed listening to all the speakers' ideas and talks.
For TEDx Orange County School of the Arts, I'm Toby.
And I'm Abby, and we'll see you next year. Have a good night.